Okay, today I'm interviewing Council Member for Ward 13, Linea Palmisano. It's been an interesting day because the budget was, the mayor's veto was overturned, so it's very timely to be speaking to her. Hello.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
Yeah. So the first thing that I think just to give some background to people about the whole budget process is that I'm very curious as to kind of when it starts. And, I watched some of the presentations. It seems like departments all come in and kind of give you a presentation. So I'm maybe you could tell us, like, does Mayor Fry come to you and talk about what he's planning to do? And then the second part of that is, how do those presentations maybe impact the whole budget process?
Yeah. People often, we just hear about it, in the paper and on the radio coming into work and stuff just at this time of year. But the budget it's a year-round thing. And one of the things I am proud of about Minneapolis is that we start with the people. We start with our Capital Long Range Improvement Committee, right? And that's a body of residents. I forget how many people are exactly on CLIC is what it's commonly called, but they go and they vet all of our capital projects, all of the big projects in the city. They're often, but not always, big public works kinds of projects, dollar-heavy, long-term investments in our city, and this body of residents that come from across the city. Every ward has 2 appointments, but then the mayor is like a broader look and has a number of other appointments.
So these are not
It's
paid
just a body of
positions,
volunteers.
Okay.
And they take a look at all of our big capital projects. And in the past, generally people are interested in this kind of thing who come from a finance background.
So who for your ward is?
So it had been Dylan McMahon and Ethan Komorowski. And I'm in the process of appointing 2 new people because they both have had other things happen. One had a baby, the other other things happen in his career. And but people come and serve on it sometimes for a very long time. I think that's maybe only my 3rd reappointment into those seats here in my 10 years. So it happens every year, and it's very time intensive for this first part of the year, for this time that I think starts around March. I know it's always still cold and snowy out, and ends in June-ish.
Okay, and they're reviewing all the big capital projects.
They're reviewing all the big capital plan things, and they get presentations from the budget director and then the head of every department who has a capital need, and they submit their order of those projects and their prioritization and notes and things they've talked about in summary to the mayor's office for preparation of his budget. And the mayor can take their advice or not take their advice, but it's like a recommendation from a body that has this very specific deliverable at the end of it. I think that's kind of cool when other cities and other places talk about participatory budgeting. I think we do it in a pretty substantial way in that manner, because participatory budgeting in some places is like, oh, here's a little pool of money. Go tell us what you'd want to do with this small amount over here. We take it upon our residents to reflect back to us the massive capital needs and bonding needs of our city, and that's a big deal. So the mayor.
So there's over 26 people on that, or?
Yeah, I'll get back to you on the number. I want to say I think the mayor has at least 10 appointments, if not more. So that would mean 36 or more people on.
Well, it's a lot of work, for sure.
It's a lot of
great
work.
That people
and Tony Hofstede, when I came into office, was a long time head of this process. Now it's David Bloomstein, who I could put you in touch with. He's very proud of his work. And a woman who had once run in Ward 11, whose name I'm forgetting. But anyway, so that's really the first step in this process. Is it kind of begins with the citizenry, and then it ends with the citizenry then at the truth and taxation hearing. But between when CLIC submits sort of their spending initiatives and when the mayor proposes his budget to the public mid-August, every department has an opportunity to go and respond to a mayor's budget request, right? I remember when I first came into office, it was Betsy Hodges, and it was a big deal that she, I think for the first time in people's budget departments, were asking, how will we move the dial on equity in your department? And everybody had to sort of respond to that. I don't remember, I mean, I'm not a department head, but there's usually a few main questions, and then what could you cut, right? Like, having gone through this pandemic year, I think we did 3 budgets one of the years that I was budget chair. One of the years I was budget chair, we did 3 separate budget cycles. These processes are similar. Mayor's office checks in with every department director, the mayor's in meetings with every department director. But we don't do zero-based budgeting. So every department is kind of assumed to have the same needs of the need before with whatever the budget instructions modifications are.
Okay, that's interesting, because I sort of favor that idea of, well, let's say you were budgeted $10 million last year and you spent 9, like, well, kind of let's go back to the beginning, and I guess that would be the 0, and see, like, well, how much do you need this next year? We're going to start with 10 million and go from there, kind of thing.
I think it would be a very interesting exercise. Especially, it's hard. You're a city. We are a $1.5 billion budget of a city. It would be hard to start at 0. And
exactly,
to recreate all that from
and
the
some
ground
commitments,
up.
I'm sure, multi-year, right?
Yeah. But also, before proposing the mayor's budget, they, and whatever mayor it is, it's been like this from the start for me, offers meetings to every single council member individually to share our priorities with them, and propose our vision for the budget, right? And it's not just the mayor, it's their budget team is often also part of these meetings. And I will say Mayor Fry takes this feedback very seriously. This isn't something that I've seen him do to just check a box. So much so that in last year's budget address, when there was funding for new projects, he called out 13 specific funding allocations he had made, each specific to a particular council member.
Right.
He didn't do that this year, but...
this year I feel like in his address he said, don't expect to get new programs.
Yeah, it was an austerity budget, right? We
had
taken all that ARPA money as far as we could take it, and this was going to be the austerity budget, was we were facing down a $23 million shortfall. So one of the biggest requests from my colleagues was more support for homelessness response, right? Outreach and support for residents, storage space, tools to close encampments humanely, connecting individuals to housing and to shelter. It was in this budget, in fact, millions of dollars for it. Only 2 council members mentioned reducing the levy in the council side. So I forget when, maybe June-ish, we had this newer budget process as proposed by council members Chugtai and Koski, as, here's our new process, and we're going to kind of go through our own version of what the mayor goes through. In that document, there were lots of public vettings of that. Only 2 council members even mentioned the need to reduce the levy that was sort of like out there hanging in the air as a priority. All my other colleagues said they wanted all this new spending. It was new spending, usually ward-specific type new spending for their ward. So a lot of the narrative that you've been hearing from council members in this budget process is that the mayor's budget wasn't a serious document, said Councilmember Chugtai, or didn't deliver for our residents, she said, or that Mayor Fry didn't prioritize residents' top priorities, is what Councilmember Koski said. I mean, I really feel that's more politically fueled than rooted in reality of how this and every budget happens, by meeting with council members, hearing what their priorities are, then putting it in a budget. For a specific example, the mayor put funding for, it was in reg services, and it was essentially to help encampments once cleared not establish again in certain places, or or to get them people there rehoused faster. That money was specifically asked for by my colleagues and then used by my colleagues in a totally different manner.
Right.
Which is a little disingenuous to say to the mayor, you want something and then go use it for something else, unless needs truly change, right? Like, I do think there always have been. I was the head of the budget for a 4-year term. There's always some needs that change that we don't know about in August, but we do by December timeframe.
So one of the things, kind of to that point, about moving, and I get there sometimes it's necessary, but just as an outsider looking in, it seemed like this year a lot of money got moved around, right? And we've
become the land of 10,000 budget amendments.
Yeah.
Yes, and well, I have some kind of more philosophical thoughts on that later, but if to keep in this kind of time frame, also to note that the mayor's team in the budget office worked very closely with the directors of all these departments, some of which were new. One benefit of a mayoral budget versus, in this case, what I think we have is the council's budget, is that there's a lot of feedback and input from departments in a mayor's budget.
Right.
And often a lot less so in a council member's amendment to something, unless it's extremely vetted out and a lot of time has been taken. But the mayor's budget has to be a real comprehensive proposal. It's the entire budget, not individual parts and pieces and piecemeal.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask about the BET, right? That's the budget estimating and taxation.
The Board of Estimate and Taxation.
Okay, right. So I think you mentioned that today in the council meeting, just again, that only a couple people maybe in that board mentioned reducing the levy. Maybe you could just, to me, I get confused as to even why it's called a levy and just not a tax, and like how this board fits into everything. So
sure.
The mayor's gone around, he's gotten his department feedback, he comes up with a number he thinks he needs. Is that
he submits his budget, but that budget, that dollar number in that budget becomes a levy, and it's the percentage that we talk about is the percentage increase or decrease, but the increase for the next amount of money that we're going to have to then spread out over the whole tax base. So that's what this, at the time it was an 8.1% levy, came with this mayor's budget in August and all of this detail, and it gets submitted to the Board of Estimate and Taxation.
So he tells the board how much he thinks the levy should be?
He's on the board, and he submits it as his proposal. Also, the council president and a person responsible for budget, in this case the council vice president, are also members of the BET, as is a park commissioner. It was Commissioner Abene this year, and then 2 separately elected at-large citywide members, and that's Steve Brandt and Sam Prieston, or Samantha Pree. So then the Board of Estimate and Taxation is charged uniquely with setting what the maximum levy can be. So the mayor's proposal was 8.1, but this year, the Board of Estimate and Taxation set it at 8.3%.
Yeah, and I think I read after that meeting that Steve Brandt had maybe suggested that the income tax on residents might be needed.
He was looking for some unique ideas.
Yeah, encouraging the mayor to find new revenue, I guess was kind of how.
Because he and the mayor both voted against this increase of the levy. But the other 4 members voted for it.
So he voted against it going from 8.1 to 8.3.
Right.
Yeah.
Because Steve Brandt is the head of the Board of Estimate and Taxation, so he runs the meeting. So he and Mayor Fry both voted against this increase of leveraging even more money from the tax base. But the body increased it then from 8.1 to 8.3%. And that becomes the maximum. The Board of Estimate and Taxation, they have some other jobs, like they authorize bonding things for like large capital projects and stuff. But in the budget process, their role is to set the limit that you can get from the tax base. But it doesn't have to be that, right? Council, the mayor, by the end of the budget process, it can be lower. It just can't be any higher than that top threshold.
Okay. And you mentioned the tax base. You're talking about residents, or you're talking about, does that also include taxes from?
Yep, commercial buildings, property owners all across the city. When I was first on the council, so 10 years ago, there was a specific building downtown. I don't remember, it was one of the larger buildings that had a higher tax capacity than like all of Ward 9 combined.
Yeah.
Right? Now, there's a big shift in market value. And so downtown doesn't absorb or sponge up more of that tax capacity, more of that levy, and more of it gets spread out more amongst the smaller properties and the smaller market value properties really all across the city. And that burden isn't felt very evenly, right?
Yeah, I've heard some small commercial building owners really saw some big jumps in their taxes. I mean, it's surprising.
A woman at the Truth and Taxation hearing 2 nights ago. Wow, it's been a blur of a week.
I bet. Yeah.
She said that her commercial building on Lake Street, that property tax increase was 30-ish or 33 maybe percent, and her own home had an 18% increase.
Right.
That's hard.
And I understand like a lot goes into that because they estimate the property's value and things like that. But it's hard to bounce back, I guess, or to incorporate that into your pricing and your budgeting and stuff as a small business owner, like how you're gonna foot that bill. So, do you attribute the need to raise taxes so much all to the decrease in the buildings downtown, their ability to pay taxes, or are there other reasons that you think taxes are as high as they are?
Well, you mean why all of our individual tax bills?
I mean, why did the levy have to go up?
Oh, the levy doesn't go up because of decreased values downtown. It gets spread unevenly, or it gets spread out further into the community when there's less to absorb it downtown. So that's actually, there's a lot of misconceptions amongst residents of, well, you passed this amount of a levy, so that's how much my taxes are going up. It's never even like that. And it shouldn't be. It is proportional to the market value of the property.
Right.
And borne by that property owner, though we all know that it gets passed along to renters of properties, whether you're renting the building you're operating a business out of or whether you're renting your dwelling, your home.
So that's good to know. I guess what I was trying to prod you toward was, are we spending beyond our means, or do you feel like we're spending the right amount, or just our revenue, what we're taking in, has gone down? I guess I'm trying to sort that out.
There aren't many revenue generating things in our city. Water. our water program is one of the few things that actually make money for the city. Or our parking, I guess, downtown is something that generates revenue for our city. But everything beyond
sales taxes, right?
We don't have we have sales tax in the downtown district.
Yeah.
But there aren't really taxes that we just get revenue for outside of certain state allowed districts. Right, there's something we have, for example, special service districts in certain business communities. Customers don't pay into that. The properties in a special service district do, and that goes to provide extra services, whether it's like garbage cans, recycling bins, holiday lighting, that sort of thing, like a buy-up, snow shoveling in a business area.
It's similar to business improvement district, not quite.
Yes.
But I mean, the taxes that we pay on our homes and stuff, that's revenue for the city, right? I mean, there's
It's that's this levy. That's this that gets spread out amongst, proportionally over all the tax parcels. The downtown issue, the mayor has to submit their budget before the implications of this are necessarily known. And that's hard for a mayor to do, is to not necessarily know how much a levy increase is going to impact someone in the Bryant neighborhood or someone in the Armitage neighborhood or someone in the Harrison neighborhood. We don't really know that at that point in time. We know that more by the end of the year, but oftentimes, and what's happening with all these buildings downtown is they're being litigated. When you have a building worth as much money as one of those downtown parcels is, you don't go through the regular process. It's essentially a lawsuit that's brought to the city, and then the
to determine the value.
To determine the value.
So, I guess what a lot of people, including myself, are probably interested in is, especially like, say, that person who said, they're between their house and their building taxes went up 30%. What happens next year, right? Because I think even this year in Mayor Fry's budget, he said it's 8.1 this year. It's going to be 9.2 next year. What is a good strategy you think that the city should be following to actually lower that, so that people don't see the similar kind of jumps in their taxes next year as they might have seen this year?
Mm-hmm. Well, a structurally balanced budget, which is what the mayor is required to submit, but the council in this case has changed around substantially, doesn't have to grow the next year. In the case, in these projections, and because the mayor is choosing to do biennial budgets, which I think is a good thing, and I've tried to create that change before, they're trying to say this is kind of a 2-year budget, and if we do this, this is what the following year feels like. And that might be about capital programming, where we're designing something in year 1, but then actually building it or implementing it in year 2. I forget what the projected increase is from when back in August when he said 8.1 this year and 9 point whatever next year. I think that's usually a warning sign that we need to ratchet back further. I think there's a lot of warning signs that show that we can't continue to just increase these things without making some substantial reductions in some parts of our city. Or like you said before, if we start at zero-based budgeting, what are the things that we can live not doing? What are some of the things we can stop doing in order to balance this budget so that the levy doesn't have to increase year after year, but for maybe small cost of living kinds of adjustments. We also want to try and do new things. To do those new things, though, we're going to have to stop doing some old things.
So one of the things that Council Member Ellison said in the meeting today was that, we're always projecting like the next budget's going to be terrible. I'm paraphrasing him, right?
Yep, you did.
But in his, and he's been on the council a long time, and he's like, it never happens. Like, they always say it's going to be terrible, it never happens. Next year, do you think it is going to be terrible, or is it going to be overblown again, right? Because definitely the mayor's come out and said this is going to lead to higher taxes down the road. This budget that that the city council passed today, or the veto they sustained. So anyway, is that a scare tactic by the mayor, or are we going to need some real changes next year to keep things from ballooning?
Based on today's approved budget that was overridden by the council, we will need to truly make all of that one-time spending amendments that, were several, many amendments were just one time taking it away from this basic city need to go to my pet project, right? But if you want that pet project in 2026, you're going to have to find more one-time money for it, or you're going to have to find an ongoing funding stream to stop doing something else and divert it over there. So first, Jeremiah Ellison has been on the council how long? He keeps talking about himself. I think he literally called himself a dinosaur, but I believe he's been here since 2018, which isn't that long.
Right.
I've been here since 2014.
Okay.
So also not nearly as long as most of the people. Well, I was one of 7 new council members in 2014, but everybody else that were there had been there, I think, almost as long as that.
Right.
By then. I don't think it's a scare tactic in particular this year, because all cities across the country are rolling off of ARPA.
Right.
We're rolling off of the COVID lifeline that we had.
Seems like St. Paul is having kind of a similar situation right now.
Yeah, and right? I think it's really interesting to see how St. Paul's has been playing out, because I think it started a lot more collaboratively with the city council saying, hey, mayor, let's collaborate. Give us a new budget that comes in at this. Like, we've heard from the people, and tax sensitivity is really dire. Let's agree to ratchet it back to this amount of a levy. Give us a budget that does that we can approve. And so now they're kind of still in the back and forth of negotiating that. We just seem to go at warp speed here this past week. But I think that was a good initial collaboration. And
sorry to jump in there, but why is that? Why did it seem like, just going back through the timeline, like, so there were 74, 78 amendments, I'm not sure, but it seems like those are all added, like, in one night. And, I mean, we talked about, the work of the Capital Improvement Committee starts in March, I think, and then, the mayor puts out the budget in August. So then there's September, October, November, but then, boom, in, like, this 1 week span, all these amendments come forward, and it feels like there's not enough time to kind of pull apart those amendments and really understand what their impacts are.
I think that the mayor's team was given those amendments and given about a day and a half to respond to what at the time was like 80 amendments.
Has that happened in the past?
No.
I mean, yeah.
Other than last year where there were 45 amendments, but they were kind of gutting the public safety aid, right? They had said no to what the mayor and the mayor's team had gone and lobbied the state for, was give us this public safety aid, we will use it for recruitment and retention purposes of police. Mm-hmm. And then the mayor, not surprisingly, put forward a proposal to city council that said, let's use it for that. The council last year said, no, we couldn't possibly, by a very narrow vote. I think it was 7-6, but the will of the council was no, so all that money was just sitting there. It was very tempting for colleagues to write out anything they could dream up that they could create with this for public safety broadly, with this public safety aid money that was coming from the state. It had to be a one-time thing, but they sure created a lot of new stuff there.
Yeah, one thing I meant, and this is a side topic, but one thing I meant to ask about before this whole happened is I know that there was a universal basic income pilot underway in the city that was part of the ARPA dollars, and I don't know what happened to it. Like I thought.
So that ARPA money that was allocated to it was spent, and now we still continue as a city to follow those that received it to see what the longer term outcomes are, but they're not continuing to get a guaranteed basic income. They're not continuing to get those checks.
So that's what I was wondering, is if there was some sort of pool of money put aside to continue the program. But it
could have been, if that was important to my colleagues or to the mayor's office. And I think the mayor's office, dealing with an austerity budget, that was one of the things that had to be cut. And none of my colleagues picked up and said, let's continue on with it and divert this other funding stream over to it. It would have to be an appropriate funding stream, because those have to be really unencumbered dollars, lest they be seen as gifting. So there's a lot of restraints on what kind of a funding stream you could use for something like that. But there was a back and forth between myself and Councilmember Chavez when I pointed out that we weren't doing it anymore. Councilmember Chavez said, oh yes, we just passed that last cycle. And he was wrong, because what we passed was this continuance of studying and not continuing guaranteed basic income for that population or any new population of people. That was not in the budget. And it became a bit of a eye-opening moment for my colleagues during this budget process.
Because I know Jenkins was a supporter, and that was something that we had talked about, like especially for mothers,
For single mothers. Something St. Paul does that's fairly innovative is they start a bank account, a savings account for every child born in St. Paul.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
A neat thing.
Cory Booker was also one of the proponents of that. So.
Councilmember Ellison, you mentioned, had said this is fear-mongering. It always has been. I do think that cities coming out off of this kind of federal aid money and this ending, it is a real wake-up call for a lot of cities. And Minneapolis isn't alone. I mean, there was a large piece done on what all of the metro area levy increases would be this year. And Minneapolis isn't anywhere near the top of it. Nonetheless, most of the people, more than any other place, live here. And it's a particularly sensitive topic. But whether it's the federal relief program ending, or the fact that my colleagues added $6.5 million of new spending with cash that is sort of like a city's savings account, right? If you put the city's finances into like an individual household type model, right? Like we're expected to keep a certain amount of cash reserves.
Right.
That was dipped into cash on hand type of thing. Those are things that help give us good bond ratings, because we have a lot of a cushion, or enough of a cushion to survive unexpected fluctuations and blows or things that might go wrong. It's less risky that way if we have a certain amount of cash reserves. They dipped deeply into downtown assets, which is a fund that is funded by downtown taxes. When people buy things, go out to restaurants, go have tickets to different venues downtown, they dipped into that. The Downtown Assets Fund is truly meant to be for keeping downtown assets up and running and in great shape, so that we don't have to use your residential taxpayer dollars to pay for something like renovations to the convention center.
Right.
Or renovations to Target Center have happened during my time here. I haven't been around for any stadium deals, thank God. but it's meant to take care of these downtown assets. So we're spending a lot new, $6.5 million of new spending that the council put forward during this amendment process. And the city council's amendments tapped into, I think it was $15 million worth of things that were in the mayor's budget in a structurally balanced way that were for other basic city services, things that will affect your snow plowing, the service you receive when you report a pothole, other kinds of needs. They diverted that in such a way that a responsible mayor, I think, has to take a look at immediately the next year and say, oh, we're going to need to refill that. We have to refill that with other money now.
And where is a good place? I mean, is it just limbs to go to kind of see, because it all happens so quickly? Where can people go to really kind of educate themselves on what amendments passed and where that money came from and went to? Is that just, you go to limbs, or
I didn't
how
even
do you
get that, I don't think, until yesterday afternoon, and I myself am getting it off of limbs.
Oh, okay, all right.
But eventually there will be a budget book that'll be more easily accessible instead of diving through all of those individual amendments.
I've tried using some of the online tools, and it can be a little confusing to figure out, like, this department has got this big a budget and this and that. And
right. It should be more obvious as to how the council affected this budget by like mid-January, after the finance department goes and ties everything out with the accounting things. But the actual
talk to me about the schedule to what you just said. So it's approved now. They approved it today.
It was final today.
What is it, December 14th? It's another month before it kicks in, or what's the schedule?
January 1st is when this spending kicks in. So people who received, wage adjustments, cost of living adjustments, that happens in the first pay cycle, I believe, of the new year. These are calendar year budgets. So I would have to think it would be effective January 1st.
So you mentioned the wage adjustments. That seemed to be a real point of contention. It seemed like some people were given wage adjustments and others weren't. Could you explain that?
So we have something I didn't really understand or appreciate until I went from the private sector here to the public sector, and as a council member, is how much of our city workforce are different unions, right? It's an organized labor force, most of it, by over a couple dozen different unions, all with different bargaining units, and some of them are very small, like radio operators, right? And some
still have those?
Well, weirdly, yes, but they do things more
probably like police operators, or
it's not 911.
Okay.
But 911 is kind of has their own union and agreement. But the radio operators are like this part of finance and property services that used to also do the squawk boxes at city council. But the radio operations does things like dispatch into different fire stations, for example. That's a radio operation. How all those different mobile things come together, whether it's information going into a squad car of our police department or information deploying a fire team to their vehicle, and then the information that's going into their vehicle on the way to the site of something they were called for. All of that are considered radio operations. It's done by a very small number of people. They're part of a particular bargaining unit, but there's very few of them. Then there's our larger units like AFSCME. AFSCME, it always impresses me the different types of job categories that fit into this AFSCME union, because they include a number of people in our city attorney's office, but they also include people in our city clerk's department. They include people in, I'm forgetting all of the different places. I think they include corrections officers, not in the city, but county. AFSCME is a very wide, large, broad union.
Right.
There's SEIU, Service Employees International Union, that hold a lot of like janitorial staff and security staff. There's the local 49ers that are a certain kind, but there's all these different unions. They all have their own labor contract with the city, though I think residents are maybe only most familiar with the police union.
So does that mean that the cost of living raise is negotiated individually, or
in each of these labor contracts that come up periodically and you enter into bargaining, our labor people and the union stewards of that particular union come together and decide on different types of wage increases, safety concerns, a new letter of agreement of what the union contract says and does. But one of those elements is about wage increases. Almost across the board, the cost of living adjustment for all of these different contracts, regardless of type, was around 4%. And so there are laws on the books of anti-discrimination. You cannot discriminate between represented employees, employees represented by a union, or non-represented employees. And so what has always been done in my 10 years here has been that same average amount is offered to the non-represented employees as a cost of living adjustment. But there's nobody at the bargaining table for them, right? Yeah. There isn't like a common letter of agreement for them. So they just fit into some of these different kind of oddball categories of our HR environment. And they come up, for review or to come due. And at the end of the year here, the non-represented groups came due in the same fashion that all these unions have different end points, start points, and this latest cost of living adjustment was 4%, which feels like a lot, but so has inflation felt like a lot. And that's, I think, most of the time, for me, it's fluctuated between 1.5% and 4%, 4% being by far the highest. But so what was on the table was, meaning to pass, were these categories, one of which were 161 non-represented people who are like middle management and upper management, people who are part of the fire department, part of the police department, but not represented by the union because they're managerial usually. And another element of a motion that was being passed were for people like our aides, our 2 policy aides each. The same thing, 4% for them, 4% for them, 4% for another category that I forget how it was represented specifically. My colleagues passed the others, but not the one for the 161 represented employees, non-represented employees. And then they moved during the budget amendment process to say, we're going to make just an across-the-board cut of X percent. We're not going to tell you what, but oh God, not that, As soon as the mayor would say, okay, here's what we're cutting, they could say, we never said cut, that solid waste and recycling person or something, right? Like, they only did half their job, saying, we're going to put our blindfolds on and say, we're just going to do an across-the-board cut that seems the most tolerable to them. Or they'll say, oh, the directors, the departments have the wisdom to say where that is. Yes, but that's part of your job in a budget cut, is to be transparent for the public and for yourself, to say, what this source of money is. You wouldn't just take your household budget and decide that you're going to cut and not necessarily know whether that's going to be from your grocery budget or your daycare.
Yeah, I mean, I have in the past kind of advocated for across-the-board cuts. I actually wanted to see 3%, but partly that was because I didn't think the city council and mayor could agree going through each of the individual departments and projects what to cut. But
at the high level, that makes sense. As you get further and further into it, and this is where the mayor and I got further and further into it, is it really impacts some very small departments very disproportionately.
Right.
And so the amendment, after we realized there was an interest in doing this with, about 2 days beforehand, started looking at what would a similar size cut look like if we were to do it more with a scalpel instead of a sword, right?
Yeah.
Like, what specifically could get removed from different departments?
Boy, I mean, given...
And it was a painful process, but
Yeah.
we got to it, and I was able to put forward on behalf of, with the mayor in hand, but mayors don't get to propose amendments that way. It's I proposed this amendment, but it would have decreased the budget levy to, at that point in time, 6.2%. My colleagues said no because they wanted to move forward with their own proposal to do such a thing.
So next year, I guess I was going to ask, like, well, what are the highlights of this year's budget that you think were done well, and what areas, like, next year will you be looking to improve upon? Like, so, for example, they cut the technology budget for HR, right? That was one of the systems,
the new
I think.
ERP, the new enterprise resource planning system software. So Workday, for example, is the big provider of it in most of the private sector industries around here.
So stuff like that, like, was there anything that you're glad to see stayed in the budget, and things that you kind of will be looking to or advocating to get put into the budget next year?
I think my biggest moment of gratitude the night of council budget adoption, right? So about midnight, was going through the passage of the resolution that affirms the capital spending plan, the large, the 6-year plan.
Okay.
And realizing, oh boy, thank God we didn't touch this one much. Could you imagine what would happen had my colleagues figured out how to go and mess around with this one? Talk about structural imbalance. I was glad that one stayed mostly intact.
Okay.
I was happy, I'm sure there's lots of strife floating around that I must hate these different entities that all my colleagues kind of shoved money into. That's not true at all, obviously. But I am very concerned that we have these different programs in CPED and different processes, and much of that was, there's no open process, there's no competitive process. There's just, my colleagues had already decided to exert managerial control and shove it into their pick of a winner for these different categories that were taking your taxpayer dollars, and we're going to say, here's the winner for that. I think there was about $6 million of your taxpayer money that we said, we're already going to pick the winners of this process. And so it was a 70 amendment quid pro quo. I'll get my stuff and you'll get your stuff. And I think that was sick and wrong. I'm very worried about how those projects will already get off the ground. I'm deeply worried about how the money, the carve-outs out of the neighborhood safety department, if we only make decisions about where to allocate resources for public safety in our city once a year and have it be a political process at the end of a mayoral budget, we are screwed. I spend a lot of time telling people here in Southwest Minneapolis how we use data to allocate public safety resources, and that is the best way that keeps everybody in our city, including you in the 13th Ward, safest, is when we can deploy things based on need and immediate data. That the police department, for example, meets twice a week to go through these crime stats and these different data dumps as to what's going on our city and where the need is. So $6.5 million of brand new spending by my colleagues that will already need to be assumed into next year's budget. $6 million worth of them picking their favorite nonprofits and already allocating money to them. And $15 million of taking away things from other, what I would call mostly basic city services, and reappropriating them to their new ideas and programs. I think that's a pretty fraught budget for next year, and I think that might have been the point. Instead of a participatory budget with the council participating, this became a retaliatory budget. And I think that was kind of the point, was to make it even worse next year from a political perspective. And I think this is the council's fault.
Yeah.
It's hard to see the positives, and I'll try to say. So here's a positive.
So it's kind of one of the things you mentioned there. Ellison today talked about how, to that exact same point, that he felt there was a lot of political ill will, if you will, on both sides. He felt like the mayor did that, and he felt like the council did that. And it kind of seems like maybe you feel that was happening as well. Or...
Here's what I said, and I very much believe it. I think that in the government restructure, oddly, many of the council members that say the most negative things about it were never around for the old structure. I was, and Councilmember Ellison was, and Councilmember Jenkins was, but that's it. And in the government structure, the city council still sets policy, and the city council needs to finalize a budget that the mayor proposes to effectuate that policy and to effectuate the mayor and his administration's needs of how we achieve our city goals together. What feels apparent is that the city council's interpretation is that since they have power of the purse, they will only use the power of the purse to exert managerial control, because they feel that they've lost. They used to have some level of managerial control, the 14 bosses problem, and now they don't. So now they will use the power of the purse to exert managerial control. So if they can't get Commissioner Barnett in the Neighborhood Safety Department to do what they want them to do, they'll just write a budget amendment accordingly. Carve that money out of the Neighborhood Safety Department and put it exactly into the program that they've just written down on the budget amendment. So they are exerting managerial control by way of the purse.
And you know, what you mentioned
I think
there,
that's the wrong interpretation of what government restructure was supposed to do.
Right. And I to your point, I remember that was the problem, right? That there were 14 bosses, as you mentioned, and that was part of the reason why we ended up going with this strong mayor system. But before we close out today, I just want to ask if there's anything that any topics that we didn't cover that you feel like you want to talk about?
I don't know if anybody's still listening at this point in the conversation, Terry.
I'm sure they will be, because a lot of people are interested in what happened. And, you know, like you said, I mean, it's unprecedented, this, to have, well, first of all, to have the mayor veto a budget, and then to have that overruled, plus the either 74 or 78 amendments. I hear different things. So it's a lot. It's a lot to happen in 1 week. And
the details are still coming due, right?
Right. I mean, I
almost
still
hesitate to speak in these broader terms, because as it all gets tied out, the finer points will emerge here. So these are just some initial.
What kind of questions do you think your Ward 13 residents are going to ask you about this week?
Many of them have just, those who've been paying attention to the budget process, some have lobbied for different things. We love stable homes, stable schools. More of that, please. Don't get me wrong. I'm one of the biggest champions of stable homes, stable schools. But this idea of increasing the scope of it in one time only for a year to apply to pre-K, beyond the original boundaries, when we can't even fulfill the need of, like 25% of the need of what we're trying to affect today, just didn't feel right. It felt like we were going to be able to hand somebody a stable home and then have to rip it out of their hands at the end of the year. It was just the wrong type of amendment for that. But I hope we can make that work. I mean, you don't usually go out on a limb like that and just hope that philanthropy and others will step in. but we are now out on that limb. And I think that might be okay if we weren't out on so many other limbs.
Right.
Several amendments take away basic city services in trade for new programs that they wanted to add in. I want to be very specific about what those were. It will feel largely invisible to residents, I think, but there will just be less of a service. And I think that's a dissatisfier. I know that's a dissatisfier. And I don't know that our customers, our residents, are going to feel that right away. But they will in the long run, and that's really unfortunate.
Will they feel it before the election? I guess that's the big...
I don't know. I guess we'll see.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.